As we bring in 75 years of our nation's freedom, let us not for a moment forget that from the moment of freedom to this moment here right now as I speak to you, India's sovereignty, India's unity has been threatened from the outside by adversaries who want what we want. We've been at war nearly non-stop since 1947. And over the next half hour, we're going to pay tribute. We're going to relive some of the moments of India's glorious hours with guns, guts and glory. And starting with India's highest ever hour, which began after the 1962 and the 1965 wars in 1971. Partition, communal violence and turmoil, in the months after independence, on August the 15th, 1947, had the Indian Army stretched to the limit. Taking advantage of the situation, Pakistan's founder Muhammad Ali Jinnah, angry about getting what he termed was a moth-eaten Pakistan, ordered the Pakistan Army to aid tribals and raiders to invade Jammu and Kashmir and forcibly take control of the state. Thousands of raiders crossed over into Jammu and Kashmir in mid-October 1947, indulging in the most brutal rape, plunder and murder. Maharaja Hari Singh sought India's assistance, but the Iron Man of India, then Home Minister Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, made it very clear the Indian Army could not land in Srinagar till an instrument of accession was signed. On October the 27th, 1947, Indian Army troops landed at the Srinagar Air Base and began to beat back Pakistani raiders and soldiers. This was independent India's baptism by fire. By December 1947, Pakistan was running low on ammunition and the Indian Army was poised to recover Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, including Gilgit and Baltistan, after a series of brilliant military operations. But with the matter taken to the United Nations and a standstill agreement, the stage was set for more conflict in the future. 1962 saw a month-long military operation both in the northeast and Ladakh, with China and India clashing along the border. A lack of preparedness and absence of professional military leadership resulted in a military debacle. In 1965, Pakistan tried to take advantage of the situation by launching Operation Gibraltar and Operation Grand Slam to take J&K by force. Under the leadership of Lal Bahadur Shastri, the army not only beat back Pakistani forces but opened a second front in Punjab, with the Indian Army reaching the outskirts of Lahore. Pakistan was taken aback by India's air and land operations. Pakistan was defeated and India had taken back control of the crucial Hajipir Pass in Kashmir. The erstwhile Soviet Union brokered a peace treaty at Tashkent, where India released all captured territory, including the hard-fought and won Hajipir Pass. But the most decisive victory, India's greatest ever, came in 1971, when India split Pakistan into two and Bangladesh was born. It began with the Pakistan Army's unprecedented atrocities on Bengalis of then East Pakistan. Thousands of women were raped and murdered. Millions fled across the border to India. Then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi decided to help liberate Bangladesh.
हम हर तरह से मुक्ति वाहिनी की सहायता करेंगे, बांग्लादेश के लोगों की मदद करेंगे और तीसरे के शेख साहब को हम जरूर छुड़वाएंगे जेल से.
Then Chief of the Army Staff, General Sam Manekshaw, sought 6 months' time post the monsoons to launch his operations. The Indian Armed Forces prepared for holding operations towards the west and a blitzkrieg for the capture of Dhaka. The 13-day war saw information warfare play a critical role, where the airdrop by a battalion at Kargil appeared in the world media as an airdrop by a brigade, breaking the morale of the Pakistan Army.
The Indian Army is in Bangladesh. Your Air Force has been destroyed. You are surrounded on all sides. And if you don't surrender, you will be killed unmercifully.
The Indian Army bypassed all Pakistan Army military fortifications en route to Dhaka, and Lieutenant General A.A.K. Niazi lost the will to fight after a series of bombings in the capital and seeing the Indian Army at his doorstep. December 16, 1971 saw the biggest military surrender after the Second World War, when 93,000 Pakistan Army soldiers surrendered at Dhaka to the Indian Army, and Bangladesh was born.
We shall provide all protection and safety. No measures of reprisals would be taken.
Professional military leadership and battle-hardened soldiers, having learnt their lessons well from the 1962 debacle and the 1965 stalemate, comprehensively defeated the Pakistan Army. This was India's greatest hour. India has always had unreliable neighbors, especially China and Pakistan. In 1999, many of you will remember that things were actually really good between India and Pakistan. There was a diplomatic bus ride that Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the then Prime Minister, had mounted to Lahore. But little did the country and the system know that the Pakistan Army, under then General Pervez Musharraf, had completely different plans in Kargil. Here's how India responded. February 1999 saw then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee undertake the Lahore bus journey to write a new chapter of peace with Pakistan. As the peace bus to Lahore was crossing the Wagah border, Pakistan Army soldiers were crossing over under cover of darkness into India's Kargil sector, Dras, the Batalik Heights in Ladakh. Pakistan's game plan was to cut off the national highway from Srinagar to Leh at Dras and Kaksar and cut off access to Leh, Siachen and eastern Ladakh. Then Pakistan Army Chief General Pervez Musharraf wanted to avenge Pakistan's defeat at the Siachen Glacier when the Indian Army unfurled the tricolour at the world's highest battlefield, beating back the Pakistan Army's attempts to occupy the Saltoro ridgeline in April 1984.
21,153 फुट की हार और -45 और बहुत तूफान। और मैं बोलता हूं कि जब दिल में एक ठानी हो, जहां इस देश के लिए हमने जो किया करना था, वो हमने सोचा कि हम तो इसी कसम खाई है कि हमें कहीं भी भेजा जाएगा, हम जाने के लिए तैयार हैं, मगर देश के ऊपर कोई उंगली उठाएगा तो हम उसको उंगली नहीं उठाएंगे।
Kargil came as a rude shock for India, basking in the diplomatic glory of the Lahore bus journey.
बहुत दिन दुश्मनी होगी, अब कुछ दोस्ती को भी मौका मिलना चाहिए।
In early May 1999, Indian convoys came under attack en route to Leh. The Kargil ammunition depot went up in flames and summer patrols both in Batalik and Kaksar went missing. India still could not believe Pakistan had stabbed India in the back, blaming terrorists for occupying heights at 18,000 feet in the initial phase of the battle.
हम शांति चाहते हैं, ये तो दुनिया ने देखा। अब दुनिया ये देखेगी कि हम शांति की रक्षा के लिए और अपनी शक्ति का भी प्रदर्शन कर सकते हैं।
Well, we have been having some of those incidents, and we had anticipated that there could be some escalation, and it appears that our anticipation was not wholly wrong, but we are fully equipped to deal with it.
Once realization dawned that these weren't terrorists, the Indian Army launched Operation Vijay and the Indian Air Force launched Operation Safed Sagar to evict the intruders from heights between 14 to 18,000 feet from the Mashko Valley through Dras, Kaksar, Kargil, Batalik and near the southern end of the Siachen Glacier.
लड़ाई के परिणाम के बारे में भी मेरे मन में कोई संदेह नहीं है। हमारी विजय निश्चित है और हम विजयी होकर दिखाएंगे।
On the night of June the 12th, 100 guns, including 155mm howitzers, boomed together, decimating Pakistani troops on Tololing in Dras. The 100-gun concept was tested, and then over the next 45 days, from Tiger Hill to Point 4875, Jubar to Khaluban, Batalik, infantry, artillery and air operations were systematically launched to dislodge the Pakistan Army soldiers.
पाकिस्तान के प्रधानमंत्री ने जब मैं श्रीनगर था तो उन्होंने मुझसे टेलीफोन पर बात की थी। उन्होंने वही बातें दोहराई जो उनके विदेश मंत्री यहां करके गए हैं। नियंत्रण रेखा का सम्मान होना चाहिए, ऐसा उनका कहना है। नियंत्रण रेखा का उल्लंघन किसने किया?
General Musharraf just could not believe that Bofors howitzers and Mirage 2000 fighter jets had been pressed into service. In panic, fearing an escalation, Pakistan's then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif was sent to the US to help broker a ceasefire. However, India insisted Pakistan must withdraw to the other side of the line of control, and on July 26th, Operation Vijay was declared a success with the complete defeat and retreat of Pakistan from Kargil. However, this was a hard-fought victory, with 530 brave Indian soldiers having made the supreme sacrifice of their lives to recover the Kargil heights from the Pakistani intrusion. Once again, India had defeated Pakistan in a conventional war fought for the first time after nuclear tests by both countries. The line of control between India and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir has been a hot, live frontier for many, many years now. But it was in 2016, after Pakistani terrorists infiltrated across this line and killed innumerable army jawans in Uri, that the Indian army, the Indian system, really woke up and realized it needed to go deeper than it ever had done before. The surgical strikes of 2016 have passed into legend, and even to this day not much is known about what really happened. But here is what we do know of one of modern India's finest military hours. The mission that signaled a new India, stunning the country, the world, and marking a shift in how India dealt with its enemies. It was in September 2016 when the phrase "Ghar mein ghus ke marenge" came alive.
ये हमारा सिद्धांत है, हम घर में घुस के मारेंगे।
battlefield was the most hostile territory imaginable, where under cover of darkness, teams of the Indian Army's Special Forces mounted a revenge operation inside Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, the scale and depth of which India had never mounted before. The attack had been forced by the gravest of provocations, an attack by Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists on the army's large camp in Uri, a devastating plot that ended with 19 Indian soldiers massacred in their sleep. 11 days later, a grieving but focused India quietly carried out a historic retaliation. Men from the Indian Army's 4 para-special forces infiltrated several kilometers across the line of control, deep into Pakistan-occupied Kashmir's Valley of Terror. Videos that came out subsequently depicted the brutal overnight attack on Pak-built terror launch pads across the line of control, throwing new light on the dangerous assault, depicting the unrelenting firepower unleashed by the Indian Special Forces teams as they decimated launch pad after launch pad with small arms and heavy weapons. After 4 hours of hell on earth unleashed by the Indian commandos, resulting in the elimination of 38 trained terrorists and the devastation of multiple terror staging areas, the assault team retreated back across the line of control without losing a single man. The videos that emerged a year later provided the first visual evidence of what happened on the night of September the 29th, 2016. Bearing out a brutal nighttime ambush of a set of clueless launch pads, they further establish the unrelenting and rapid nature of the mission. On the morning after the return of the brave Indian team, the Indian Army took an unprecedented step, actually announcing to the country what it had done.
The Indian Army conducted surgical strikes last night at these launch pads. The operations were basically focused to ensure that these terrorists do not succeed in their design of infiltration and carrying out destruction and endangering the lives of citizens of our country.
Pakistan-sponsored cross-border terror hasn't stopped by any stretch. But ever since the Uri strikes, India has ensured that for every Indian killed by infiltrating terrorists, a full multiple of their ilk pays the price back with swift, uncompromising death. But unlike that morning after the surgical strikes, you probably won't ever hear about it. Bureau Report, India Today.
Well, less than 3 years after the Uri surgical strikes, Pakistan struck again, this time in Pulwama. And remember, by this time, India had already set a precedent. When provoked and attacked in this manner, when this kind of blood was spilled, India needed to act. And that's the reason why just a few days after the Pulwama attack, India responded. This time not from the ground, but from the air.
Less than 2 years after the Uri attack, terror raised its ugly head once again in February 2019. This time, a Jaish-e-Mohammed suicide bomber rammed his vehicle into a CRPF convoy in Kashmir's Pulwama. 40 Jawans were killed in the devastating high-intensity blast, making it the single most damaging terrorist attack in Jammu and Kashmir ever. A blood-drenched statistic in a state that had already seen so much death. The terrorist, trained and funded by Pakistan, had shaken an India that was steeped in election mode. It would take 12 days for India to reply. And after the devastating precedent set by the 2016 surgical strikes, India knew it had little choice but to take the fight
to the enemy again. On the 26th of February 2019, a group of Indian Mirage 2000 fighters crossed the LOC in darkness and unleashed a flurry of bombs at a Jaish-e-Mohammed facility nestled in hills outside Pakistan's Balakot town. The first aerial strikes on Pakistani territory since the 1971 war would send shockwaves around the world and herald a new paradigm for Indian retribution to Pakistan's terror factories. Balakot would become a buzzword for decisive punitive action, raising temperatures during election season and putting the onus fully on a muscular new India that was reaffirming that it would not take terror attacks lightly anymore. The names of the hero pilots would only emerge a year later. The 5 Indian Air Force pilots who flew into hostile airspace in their Mirage 2000 fighters, they spent only a few minutes in hostile airspace launching their precision weapons. Weapons that would glide many kilometers into Pakistan and smash down into that terror facility on a hilltop outside Balakot city. A mission that has passed into legend the very same day. But there were tangible lessons learned. Lesson 1. Choice of weapon configuration. The Indian Air Force launched munitions that had been fitted with penetration warheads. In other words, they were rigged to first pierce through the roof and floor of the facility before exploding to cause maximum casualties. Given the massive denials by Pakistan and the claims and counterclaims that followed, the Indian Air Force feels it could have fitted some of the Spice 2000 munitions with high explosive warheads so that the destruction would have been fully visible on the surface too and brought down the buildings. Lesson 2. Choice of weapon itself. The Spice 2000 precision-guided munition used by the Air Force to bomb Balakot's Jabba top didn't have a video feed that could have provided even more visual proof of the accuracy of the strike. Experts have wondered whether, under better weather conditions, the Air Force could have deployed the Israeli-made Crystal Maze munitions, which would have provided a live video feed of the full flight path till the target. The Indian Air Force executed Balakot with precision, but 3 years is a long time in air power. New enemies at its border and a whole new war-like paradigm means that the next Balakot, if it were to happen, will have far fewer lessons and no room for propaganda. Bureau Report, India Today. And finally, remember when I said that we've been nearly constantly at war? We literally are even now, with our biggest adversary on our doorstep for nearly 3 years and counting. We're talking about China, the Eastern Ladakh standoff that has settled into a status quo with 200,000 troops massed on both sides in a war-like situation that doesn't really have an end in sight. Remember what I said? India continues to be, even in its 75th year, at war. Elevated combat air activity in Ladakh. A result of the Chinese Air Force violating Indian airspace repeatedly in recent days. Just around the time that the China-Taiwan flashpoint has heated up, India has witnessed a marked ramp-up in Chinese air power provocations. The latest manifestation of India's newest and perhaps biggest ever defense challenge in 75 years of independence. In the most hostile high-altitude battlefield on Earth, that the Indian military isn't prepared. Since May 2020, when Xi Jinping's armies massed along the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh, the Indian Air Force has been deployed big at these icy heights. From the new Rafale jets to Sukhoi fighters and MiG-29s, even the new Apache attack helicopters have been chopping through the thin Ladakh air on combat patrol. And now, over 2 years since the world's largest military standoff began at this high-altitude battlefield, China is busy raising temperatures again. Preceding this sudden spurt in airspace violations and provocations using combat aircraft, China had activated a massive military aviation build-up, unfolding in clear view of imaging satellites. In March last year, the Chinese government approved plans to construct 20 multi-purpose airfields in Tibet. All signals that point to one thing: China has been preparing for war, or at the very least, a new escalation and expansion of this conflict. With close to 200,000 soldiers now deployed along both sides of the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh, a giant chessboard of a standoff zone, where China moves are being matched by Indian counter-moves. As the two Asian giants engage in a high-altitude board game, tanks, troops, missiles and fighter jets are pieces in the game. Last year, the Indian Army decided on one of its biggest ever reorientations in history. The Indian Army, which once extensively planned and prepared for warfare on the plains of Punjab and the sandy wastes of the Thar Desert, has been forced to reconfigure itself to fight along a second front, the high-altitude deserts of the world's toughest battlefield in Ladakh. The official term for this historic move towards the north is rebalancing. But for a standoff that began in May 2020 on the banks of the Pangong Lake, there's no sign of any major de-escalation. 2 years since, the Chinese have begun building access infrastructure literally on a war footing very close to where the whole standoff actually started. The Chinese have also built permanent accommodations for their troops, allowing 2 winters and counting to freeze the new status quo into the ground. India isn't sitting around helplessly, of course, building its own infrastructure and roads in Ladakh and posing a running challenge to Chinese forces. You don't hear much from Ladakh anymore, like you used to in 2020 and 2021, when India took the challenge to China's door. But make no mistake, India's biggest military challenge and strategic threat since 1947 continues to build. In the freezing hellscape of Ladakh's highest altitudes, India's biggest ever deployment continues to stand guard. Bureau Report, India Today.
75 years of freedom have been the result of fighting, of defending, and people who've made the supreme sacrifice. As we journey through these wars, let's never forget those who've laid down their lives, given their blood for the freedom of this country. Thank you for watching.